This morning we're going to finish our series in Jeremiah. We've been doing Jeremiah for several weeks now, and we've been looking at when God calls and how God has special calling on all of our lives. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, that God has something special for you. And many times it can relate to work. Sometimes it's just your personal life. Sometimes God just calls you to a special decision where he says, I got something just for you. And we've been looking at what it looks like to obey, what it looks like to say yes to that calling. I remember when I was 13 years old, there's different times where God has called me to do special things. When I was 13 years old, I was called to become a pastor. I went back and forth with God on whether I wanted to do that. But another thing, when I was young, I was at a children's camp, and for some reason, I felt this special call in my life. And God told me basically three things. He said, I have something special for you, and there's three things that I have for you. And I want you to make a commitment. And it was almost like I heard him audibly. And he said, I want you to commit to never have a drink, to never drink, never smoke, and be faithful till you're married. Those are the three things. And I was still young. I was probably about 12 years old when this happened. And I made that commitment. I said, okay, God, I'm a kid. I can do that. No problem. And it was a commitment that I said, okay, I am going to stand firm on this commitment. When I was in high school, I played soccer. I loved playing soccer. That was my life. And I remember as a soccer player, I went to this big school, and it was great. But my friends on my soccer team would always get together and have parties. And usually it was Friday nights, because after the football game, we would watch our football team play, and then then the soccer team would all get together. They'd go over to one of the guys' house, and they would just have fun. They'd have a party, and then Saturday morning we'd have our soccer game. I never got invited to those parties for a while because they kind of knew that, I went to church and I didn't do those things. Well, one time, one of my friends was like, "Hey, you need to come. You need to come to this party." I'm like, okay, let's go to the party. I was like, finally, they're accepting me. Finally, I'm cool. I'm hip with it, even though I never was. It's okay. But I went to this party, and the party's going, and there's all my friends are there from the soccer team, and one of the players snuck into his mom's, liquor cabinet and had a bunch of wine and a bunch of beer. And so they're all drinking, all my friends in high school, they're drinking, everything like that, and they're, "Hey, Andrew, come have a beer with us." Like, "Come on, Andrew." And they kept saying, I was like, no, at first I was like, no, I can't, I don't drink, If I did that, my parents would kill me. They won't know. And over and over and over again throughout the night, as we're having fun, they started making fun of me. They kept putting it in front, saying, "Hey, come on. No one will know. Let's just have a good time." Let me ask you a question. If you were pressed, if you have a conviction on your life, but then something came up or something started putting pressure on you or someone started putting pressure on you, would you give up on your convictions? If you're in school, if a friend or a peer wants you to do something where God doesn't want you to do it, even though everyone else can do it and everyone else does it, but God told you not to do it, would you do it? Would you give up on your convictions? Or I guess another way to ask is, who do you live for? Whose approval do you live for? Is it man's or God's? There's two different people that I want to look at today in Scripture. Two different people as we finish up our series in Jeremiah. There's two different people that I want to look at. And the first person that I want to look at his name is King Zedekiah. Okay? This King Zedekiah, this is the king of Judah. As we've been studying through Jeremiah, we know that the nation of Judah is the southern nation of Israel. And the northern nation has been taken away in captivity, and God sent Jeremiah to tell the nation of Judah, hey, you better repent, you better start obeying, or I'm going to send Babylon down, and they're going to take you captive. Well, Jeremiah kept saying it over and over again, and Jeremiah was not popular at all. In fact, everyone hated him. They did all kinds of things to him. They did not listen. They did not obey. So Babylon actually came and attacked Judah multiple times. And every time they would come, they would attack the nation of Judah. They would take some prisoners, and they'd go back to Babylon. And then they'd come back and take some more, and they'd go back to Babylon. This had happened over and over again, where really there's just a few left in the city of Jerusalem. Now, King Zedekiah, he was not listening to God. In fact, when Jeremiah actually wrote what God told him to write on a scroll and he brought it to King Zedekiah, Zedekiah got so mad that he had the scroll burnt. He wasn't going to listen. He had Jeremiah, people allowed him or talked him into arresting Jeremiah. He had Jeremiah beaten. He actually had Jeremiah thrown into a pit, a cistern, to be left for dead. It said that the well was actually was empty. So when Jeremiah fell into the well, he sank into this mud, and they were just going to leave him there to die. But they pulled him out of the cistern, they pulled him out, they chained him up. So he has not been kind to Jeremiah. Well, now this king is in trouble. We're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 38. Jeremiah chapter 38. Jeremiah had just been pulled out of the cistern. He had barely survived. No one likes him. Yet Babylon is attacking again. Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 14 is where I'm going to start. And this is what happens. Zedekiah decides to call for Jeremiah because he needs to know what to do. Then King Zedekiah sent for Jeremiah the prophet and had him brought to the third entrance to the temple of the Lord. I'm going to ask you something, the king said to Jeremiah. Do not hide anything from me. Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, if I give you an answer, will you not kill me? I mean, even if I did give you counsel, would you not listen to me? But King Zedekiah swore this oath secretly to Jeremiah. He says, as surely as the Lord lives, who has given us breath, I will neither kill you nor hand you over to those who are seeking your life. What's happened is Zedekiah brings Jeremiah and he says, listen, please help me. I'm in trouble. And Jeremiah looks at him and is like, look, I've been trying to help you. All you're going to do is kill me, just like you tried last time. Why would I help you? And the king's like, no, I promise this time. I promise I won't this time. King said, I'm not afraid of the other people anymore. Just please help me out. I realize that you are from God. I realize that I'm about to lose. I just need your help. So Jeremiah says to him, then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, this is what the Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel, says. This is your answer. Jeremiah says, I know that you haven't listened to me yet, the entire book, but I'm going to give you the answer. If you surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, your life will be spared, and this city will not be burned down, and you and your family will live. But if you will not surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, this city will be handed over to the Babylonians, and they will burn it down, and you yourself will not escape from their hands. Jeremiah said, this is easy. This is what God says. Give up. Get the white flag out, surrender, say, I surrender, I give up. And he says, if you surrender, I promise this city's not going to get burnt down. I promise you will live. It'll work out. Just surrender. However, God says, if you do not surrender, then you know what? You're going to die. It's that easy. Easy choice. Right? Have you ever been presented with an easy choice? Right? It's like I was talking to my daughter yesterday, about this, and she's like, it reminds me, we were actually talking about this passage, and she's like, it reminds me of Sid the Sloth. when they're about to enter that cave, I don't know if anybody remembers Ice Age, the original Ice Age, hilarious. And Sid the Sloth, they're about to enter this cave that looks like death, and he's like, no thanks, I choose life. And he walks the other way. I mean, that should have been, that's the easy choice. You should have been like, okay, I choose life. Like a kid. I don't know if you remember being a child or, if you remember raising your children, it's, easy choices like clean your room or be grounded. Should be pretty easy, right? Clean your room. Or as you get older, be home by dark or never leave the house again. Pretty simple choice growing up, right? Or, stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about, right? Easy choice. Shouldn't be that hard. Or at least you would think. King Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, but I'm afraid of the Jews who have gone over to the Babylonians. For the Babylonians may hand me over to them, and they will mistreat me. King Zedekiah said, but I'm afraid of what they're going to do. Notice, he's not afraid of disobeying God. Notice he's not afraid of saying no to God. He's afraid of the people. He's afraid of those around him. He's afraid of what the others are going to do. He's king and he's like, but Jeremiah, you don't understand. I'm afraid of them. I fear what they are going to do to me. If I wave that white flag, if I surrender, what are they going to do? They will not hand you over, Jeremiah replied. Obey the Lord by doing what I tell you, then it will go well with you, and your life will be spared. Jeremiah says, this is simple. King, this is simple. Come on, I know you haven't listened this whole time, but this is simple. Obey God or you're going to lose your life and everyone else. King, who are you living for? Are you living for God? The one that you just said is God of heaven and earth, the one that you just praised, the one that you said is God Almighty, the one who controls everything. Are you living for Him? Or are you living for those people? Who are you going to fear more? Who are you going to obey? They say fight. Everyone around you, King, says fight, but God says surrender. So who is it going to be? We start looking at it that way, it kind of, I'd imagine being the king a hard choice, and probably not as easy as what it first initially felt like. It's almost like a no-win situation, Well, yes, I'm supposed to obey God, I know that, but you know what? They're the ones with the pitchforks. I know I'm supposed to say yes to God, but you know what? They're the ones that can hurt me. Jeremiah, that cistern that you were thrown down into a few, chapters ago? Yeah, that's what they're going to do to me if I surrender. You ever been in one of those moments? God has called you to something. God has asked you to do something. You're like, yes, God, I know, but I'm afraid because they're the ones that control the money. Or, yes, God, I know I should do that, but you know what? They're the ones that have social media, and they're going to blast me all over social media. Yeah, God, I know what I'm supposed to say and how I'm supposed to live, but they're the ones that control my fate at school. Or he or she controls my job. God, I know I'm supposed to obey, but they're the ones that make me feel good and lift me up. It should be an easy choice, but the question is, who do you live for? Whose approval are you living for? King Zedekiah had a choice. I want to look at someone else. The King Zedekiah had this choice, and then I want to jump back a couple chapters. I'll tell you about another group of people. They're called the Rechabites. In fact, in chapter 35 is where we find them. I want to give you the history of this group of people, the Rechabites. See, that goes all the way back to several generations, back when Elijah was a prophet. And there was Ahab and Jezebel, and Elisha was anointed to be the next prophet. And Jehu was king. And as Jehu was king, there's this guy named Jonadab, joined Jehu, this king, and did good things and actually helped get rid of Ahab's entire family. And this is many, 240 years previous to this. And as he helps the king, God tells him one thing, or God gives a command for his family. And this is what is commanded. God gave his family this command to never build homes, to never plant fields. God came to him and said, I want you to never build homes, never plant fields. I want you to always live in tents, and I want you to never drink alcohol. Those were the things that he told him to do. This was 240 years, 6 generations before we pick up in chapter 35. And this is what happens. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord during the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Go to the Rechabite family and invite them to come to one of the side rooms of the house of the Lord. And then gives them some wine to drink. So Jeremiah says, so I went to Jaazaniah, son of Jeremiah, and his brothers and all his sons, the whole family of the Rechabites. So he brings them all and he finds this clan that's been wandering around in tents. And he says, I brought them into the house of the Lord, into the room of the sons of Hanan, son of Igdaliah, the man of God. It was next to the room of the officials. Then I set bowls of wine and some cups before the men of the Rechabite family and said to them, drink some wine. So here's what happened. Prophet Jeremiah obeys God and invites them into the temple. And as normal, this is a normal thing. This would not be out of the ordinary. This isn't anything crazy or anything like that. But you would, if you ever got invited by a priest or someone in the priestly line into a meal in the temple, that was like something special. It was like being invited to the White House. So they get to the place, they come into the temple, and they're going to have this great meal, and it was normal custom to have, a glass of wine as they talk, as they sit, and before the meal. Then they usually break bread. They would eat the bread. They would have meat, and then they would have another second glass of wine at the end of the meal. Just everyday normal thing. He invites them in, and this was something that you would never turn down, the hospitality. Especially with a priest in the Lord's house. You do what you're told. You do what you're offered, or you'll be judged. You'll offend the host. And if you offend the host in the Lord's house, you risk being cut off from the worship community. I mean, this is just something you don't do. You accept the hospitality. I remember growing up. My mom and dad always taught me that, when you go over to a guest's house, when you go over to a friend's house, no matter what they serve you, you eat it. That was a rule in our house. When we went to someone's house, no matter what, you eat it. Now, something about me when I was younger is I hated spaghetti. I love it now, okay? So I could not stand spaghetti. Do you know how many times we went to a friend's house and you know what they served? Spaghetti. And it was horrible because we'd walk in and I'd catch the whiff of spaghetti and I'd be like, oh no. And I have to start talking myself into it. Okay, you can do it. You can keep it down. You can do it. And we'd go in and my parents would give me that look like, don't you dare say a word or else you will die. And we'd get there, and they'd put spaghetti on my plate, and it usually like green beans and, something else. Who knew? And all I knew was like, I have to eat the spaghetti. Because there's no way I was allowed to offend our host. So Jeremiah pulls him in. He says, here, have a drink. Now, they had been commanded by God many, many, many years ago never to drink. And they had a choice. Who are they going to live for? Were they going to obey God at this moment, or were they going to listen to man? It's the same situation King Zedekiah was in. Who do I obey, God or man? Who do I live for? But they replied, no thanks. They replied, we do not drink wine because of our forefather Jonadab, son of Rechab, gave us this command. Neither you nor your descendants must ever drink wine. Also, you must never build houses, sow seed, or plant vineyards. You must never have any of these things, but you must always live in tents. Then you will live a long time in the land where you are nomads. We have obeyed everything our forefather commanded us. Neither we nor our wives nor our sons nor daughters have drunk wine or built houses to live in or had vineyards, fields, or crops. And they go on, they says, no, thank you, we don't do that. They just plain out said, you know what, that's okay. God told us not to do it a long time ago, and we choose God. You imagine, I don't know, being in their position, you'd be like, wait, what? Like, how could you still be obeying that old, ridiculous command of your great, 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 great grandfather? Okay, this was 4 greats before Grandpa. 240 years ago. Okay, here, quick quiz. Does anybody know who your relative was 240 years ago? This is Revolutionary War time. Okay, this is right around the 1780s-ish? Okay, Revolutionary War. Does anybody know who fought in the Revolutionary War in your family? Hey, we got one. 4 greats. Now the question is, do you know what that person said or did? Is there any story, anything that's been passed down from that long where you said, wow? I mean, most of us don't even know who it was, let alone what God told them. Right? I know my grandpa. I know my great-grandpa's name. That's about as far back as I can go. And they went back 4 greats, and that was before Ancestry.com. These people are living in a completely different generation, a completely different world as their great-great-great-great-grandfather. They still, though, lived in tents. They still didn't farm. They still obeyed what God told them to do. I wonder if the thought ever went through their mind, like, well, you know what, this is tough and this is unfair. This is too difficult. Everyone else gets to build these houses. Everyone else gets to live in these wonderful places. Everyone else gets to enjoy all these other things, but we don't. I wonder if they ever thought, man, all these years, this is kind of unfair. Or how many times a kid growing up, as a parent, you're raising your child and they say, well, why don't we get a house? Well, because your grandfather said God told him that we shouldn't have a house. Well, why are we listening to that? Or your great-grandfather told, or your great-great-grandfather. I mean, eventually, wouldn't they get sick and tired of living in a tent? Maybe the first generation understood, but after a while, because dad or great-great-great-great-grandfather listened to a God. I mean, how many of us obey our parents, just our parents, that well? Right? I don't know how many times growing up, and I've heard it, boy, mom and dad said I can't do this, but I can't wait till I get out of the house, right? When I get out on my own, when I finally graduate and get out on my own, they can't control me anymore, and freedom. But not the Rechabites. Not the Rechabites. They said, sorry, we can't because we don't live for you. We don't live for anybody else. We don't live for the people all around that we have been watching for generations. We live for God. And God told us, I know it's been a long time ago, but God told us not to do certain things, and that is who we obey. That was their answer to Jeremiah. And then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah and says, this is in verse 13, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says, go and tell the men of Judah and the people of Jerusalem, will you not learn a lesson and obey my words, declares the Lord. Jonadab, son of Rechab, ordered his sons not to drink wine, and this command has been kept to this day. They do not drink wine because they obey their forefathers' command. God says, look, these are the example of how to obey me. They have obeyed. And in verse 18 it says, then Jeremiah said to the family of the Rechabites, this is what the Lord Almighty God of Israel says, you have obeyed the command and have followed all the instructions and have done everything he ordered. Therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says, Jonadab, son of Rechab, will never fail to have a man to serve me. God says, because you live for me and not man, because you have obeyed the command, I will bless you. And I will bless your family. And I will bless your family for generations, because you care more about what God says than what society says. The Rechabites obeyed. Now jump back over to King Zedekiah. Same choice. Little bit different circumstance, but same choice. Who do I live for, God or man? Jeremiah tells him what to do in verse 24, chapter 38, verse 24. If we jump back over, it says, then Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, shh, do not let anyone know about this conversation, or you may die. He tells him to be quiet. He says, look, don't tell anyone that we talked. In fact, he sent Jeremiah back to the courtyard, and he does what the people want instead of what God wanted. He tells Jeremiah, shh, just don't tell anyone I even talked to you. I don't want people to think that I'm obeying this or listening to you. I'm going to do what I want and what the people want. And because of that, he brings disaster upon himself. Everything that God said would happen in chapter 39. The city gets burned down to the ground. All the officials are killed. Zedekiah actually loses his eyes, and then he dies. It does not turn out well to the one who decided to live and please those around him rather than God. He chose wrong. He chose the wrong person to obey. So I'm going to wrap this up. We face the same situation as King Zedekiah and the Rechabites. Every day God calls us to obey him and follow him and no one else. And I know it can be hard sometimes because the life that God calls us to is different than everyone else. The life that God calls us to is different than what the world lives and how society lives. It's different than what other people want us to do. As a child, it came across a lot of times in my life is the type of movies that I wanted to watch and wasn't allowed to watch. Or video games to play, or relationships. As adults, when we get older, it kind of more comes into like the kindness that we give to others, or the forgiveness, or the love that we show in the face of hate. The life God calls us to is to be different. To be so different, it's like a light on a hill, that our light shines so much that it's such a positive witness that it shines God's love. It reflects his light to everyone around us. It's supposed to be different, the way we live. It's supposed to be such a positive witness that it's like putting salt on unsalted food so that it tastes better. I don't know if anybody's ever had mashed potatoes without any salt in it. Ugh. I'm sorry for everyone with a low sodium diet. I am sorry. But there's nothing better than getting a big thing of mashed potatoes and putting some salt and pepper in it. God says that's what you're supposed to be like. You're supposed to make this world flavorful. You're supposed to make this world be good. God desires is for us to be so in love with him that we obey no matter what. We obey even when we don't know why. We obey even when it's hard and when it hurts. We obey even when everyone around us says not to. It is the number one theme throughout Jeremiah. This whole book revolves around that entire purpose. God desires us to obey, just like he desired them to obey. This morning, I pray that we make the commitment to live for God and not other people. I'll finish the story that I started with. It's just so everyone doesn't ask. Usually I would just leave it hanging. I went to the party, stayed there till about 1 o'clock in the morning, and over got made fun of, over and over got put in front. But you know what? I said, God, I am going to stand for you because I'm stubborn redhead. That's why you gave me red hair. I didn't cave in. And it's something that I can proudly say that I have kept my word that I made at 12 years old. I have kept that in my entire life. And I can see that as I obeyed God, that he guided my life because of that. If you want to know the ending of Jeremiah, what happens to the one who obeys, the one who obeyed the entire book, if you look over the next chapter in chapter 40, the entire city comes down, everyone gets captured, everyone gets taken away except Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, actually God tells the king of Babylon, the ruler of Babylon, God speaks to him and says, you know what, you're going to release Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is freed. Jeremiah is blessed because he prophesied and he followed God his whole life. Because he lived for God. This morning, our worship team is going to come forward and we're going to end. Who are you living for? Are you living for the approval of those around you? Or are you living for God? I pray this morning that we all say we are living for God. Let's stand. Let's worship.